Ok. Welcome back, fellow explorers. Welcome back to the reading of Quag, the first novel of Dungeons and Dragons. We are at chapter 9 of 18, so we are in the middle of the road, I think. In the last part, you can see it, you can listen it on Twitch or on my YouTube channel. In the last part, our 7 heroes divided for setting up an ambush for some evil druid who are following them. The hero, Milo Yegon, the swordsman, his friend, Nail Fangtooth, a warboar berserker, and a sword maiden, Evilly, fight with the druid, who escaped from the ambush, summoning 3 beasts, 3 creatures for defend itself. The heroes slay the creatures and regroup with the bard Wymark and the cleric Divdine. They are going to the mountains for finding a gold dragon, Lycius, for a war against an unknown evil. There is also a 7th companion, a rogue elf, Ingr, with another name for an Italian guy like me. Then, chapter 9. Before we start, I make notification for the live. Wait a second. Okay. Chapter 9. Harp Magic. I don't know. You are listening me? Okay. They watched, now alerted, as the twilight faded. Milo noted patches of a dark that were certainly not bomb from any tree or bush, but lay in pools as if ready to entrap a man. The last time the cleric Divdine said to Milo Yegon that there was shadows who are trying to kill them. Always, if you stare directly at them, they rested quiescent. But if you turn your head, you cocked from the corner of an eye, stealthy movement, or so it would seem. These are of chaos, Divdine continued, but since they take shape in no real substance, as yet perhaps they are but spies. However, the stench of evil lies in them. His nostrils expanded. Now Milo cocked to that smell of faint corruption which those who gave allegiance to the dark always emitted. The cleric arose. From the bosom of his robe he brought forth a small vial carved of stone, overlaid with runes in high relief. He went to the mounts Wymark and Milo had ridden, and taking the stopper from the bottle, he wet the tip of his right forefinger with what it contained. With this wetted finger, he drew invisible runes on the horses' foreheads and haunches. When I returned, he sprinkled a few drops across the entrance to their cramped camp. Holy water from the great shrine, he gave explanation, such as those may spy upon us. But we need not fear they are tempting more, not while they are out there and we are here. Nail grunted. These are your spell, priest, and you have confidence in them, but I have no liking for what I cannot turn axe or tusk against. Divine shrugged. The shadows have no weight. If you could put axe against them, then they would be something else. Now, tell me how you fared. More of this druid who set a culling spell. He held his hands cupped about his prayer string, not looking at any of them, remaining tense and listening as each in turn told his or her part of the story. When they had done, he made no comment. In fact, they had brought out supply, and were eating when he, not noting the share evil he had laid near his knee, spoke. A tamer of beasts, an adventurer who may be of the Thieves' Guild, and one who can summon. You know this druid? It was too dark now to see much, but they knew he asked that in the direction of Nail. I know of him. He lurked about when the mage Wogan led us to the finding of the Toad's Pinnacle. Wogan would have no dealings with him, and he sniveled like a white-blooded coward when the mage sent him out of our camp. Since then, he seems to have gained some courage, or else his magics are the greater. Never underestimate one who has the summoning power, commented the cleric. We destroyed what he used to bring the Urgauns upon us. The Urgauns are the creature. Milo pointed out. Is it not true that a spell once used, unless it can be fed from another source, will not answer again? So we have believed, Devdine assented. But now we deal with a thing or a personality that is alien. What tricks its servants may be trained in, we cannot tell. They set no watch that night, for the cleric assured them that with the holy water sign upon them, their mounts would not wander, nor could anything come upon them without a warning that would alert him. There were no shadows in the morning. However, as the day lengthened into afternoon, all of the party were aware that the fleeting, near invisible things again both trailed and walled them in. By twilight, they reached the next tributary of the Norton River. In the half-light, they could see a mountain range silhouetted against the western horizon. Running water, Divdine looked down at the stream. Now we shall see what manner of thing these splotches of dark may be. We shall cross. The girl interrupted him. You mean because some evils cannot cross running water? I have heard that said, but is it the truth? It is the truth. Now let us push to the other side and test it on our followers. Ingrid had left a storm marker by what must be the shallow part. The pack ponies had to be driven on and the water came well up their shaggy legs. Their own mounts picked away cautiously, advancing as if they mistrusted the footing. Once they were across, Divdine swung around, and the others followed his example, to look back at the shore they had just quitted. There were distinct blots of mark there right enough, no clean shadows, but something of the dark able to mimic such. These separate parts flowed together, pulling on the sand, and then it flapped up. Milo heard the battle-maid's breath hiss between her lips. That hiss was answered with far more strength by Afrita, a pseudo-dragon friend of Nail Fangtooth. Their horses snorted, fought for freedom. The black thing flapped as might a banner in a heavy wind, save there was no wind. It was well off the ground now, rising vertically. Once aloft, it made to dart after them, spreading an even stronger stench of evil. But though it stretched out over the sand and gravel that bordered the water, it could not thrust the long tongue it now formed far enough to reach them. That tongue flailed the air, beat against an unseeable wall. It cannot pass water, Divine observed with quiet satisfaction. Therefore, it is but a very inferior servant. Maybe it can pass water, Wymark broke in, but what of that? He pointed north. Milo's horse was rearing and plunging. For a moment or two, his attention was all to controlling the frightened animal. Then he had the chance to glance in the direction the bird had indicated. A twin to that which still strove to reach them befouled the air, flapping along. But apparently that way of progress was difficult for it to maintain. Even as the swordsman caught sight of it, the mass ceased its flying and settled groundward. It broke apart the instant it touched the earth, small patches seeping away like filthy water from an overturned rotting tube. The light was good enough for them to watch this dispersal of the creature, if it were a single creature able to lose itself into parts. Though the shadow bits moved, they did not turn toward their party, as Milo fully expected. Rather, like flattened slugs, they set a path parallel to the line of march but some distance away. Nail spat at the ground beyond the horse's shoulder. "It goes its own way," he commented. "Perhaps it is rightly weary." He looked to the cleric. "What say you, priest? Do we hunt it?" Divine had been leaning forward in his light saddle watching the flopping of the new set of shadows as they strung out. "It is bold," Milo caught the inference of that. "What does such boldness mean?" The cleric shook his head. "What can I say about any of Chaos' servants? If a man does not guard well against even the most simple appearing of such, he is 3 times a fool. Let us test it, then, before Divine could protest. Scusate, sorry, wrong voice. Let us test it, then. Before Divine could protest, the berserker launched into the air the pseudo-dragon, who circled his head and then shot with the speed of a well-loosed arrow toward the nearest of the moving blobs. Having reached the position above it, Afrita hovered, her supple neck arching downward, her jaws open as if she meant to dive straight into the thing and do battle. The blob of darkness on the ground paddled, halting its advance. Toward it hastened another to join with it, then a third. From the center of that, uniting there, arose a tendril of darkness like the tentacles of a sea monster. But Afrita was not to be so caught. She spiraled upward, keeping just above that arm of black. Other parts of the shadow creature poured toward the sight. As they watched, these two joined with the first, and the reaching whip grew longer, higher. "So," commented Nail, "it will do battle." Divine, who had kept his attention on the scene, his eyes narrowed with speculation, now swung his bed string in his hand. Milo suddenly thinking that perhaps they did have something to give them warning of possible attack, glanced downward at the bracelet about his wrist. He was somehow certain that if this dark thing meant them harm, the bracelet would come to life. Yet it had not. The cleric slid his beds back, cupping them in his hand. "Call back Afrita, warrior. This thing is a spy and not a fighter. But whether it can summon that which will do battle, I cannot tell." Let it watch us, since it would seem we have no real choice in the matter," cut in the bard. But let us also seek the mountains and speedily. Ingrid has knowledge of safe places thereabouts, where there are defenses against Causewary, old but known to his own people. So they rode on, while the shadow beasts kept pace with them. Their hands were ever close to their weapons, and Nail kept afraid alows and flying. Now and again she fluttered down to ride upon the berserker's shoulder, for a short distance, hissing into his ear as if reporting. But if she had anything of importance to say, Nail did not share it with the others. Milo kept closing and unclosing his hand that had been so weak after the wound. His fingers could grip now with all their whole vigor on the sword hilt when he put them to the test. There was a small ash beginning in his shoulders, as his tenseness grew and he continually searched the ground ahead for signs of danger. That these shadows which spied on them could summon some greater menace was only plain logic. The pack ponies were no longer reluctant, dragging back on their lead ropes. Rather, they crowed up until they trotted along between the riders, sometimes snorting uneasily. Although they never swung their heads to watch the shadows. Perhaps it was the stench of unsent evil which a rising wind brought that spurred them so. Again, the riders found the trail markings the elf had set. Today they made no attempt to erase them. It was enough that they were accompanied by these representatives of chaos. There was no longer reason to hope they might conceal their passing. Twice they halted to water and rest the horses, and to eat the moisture of Gull's cloak, dried out in the wind, had to be renewed from one of the water backs. As usual, the lizardman made no comment. He rode on ungracefully, for his kind did not take to any mounts except some scaled things things found in the seven swamps, which could not be used far away from those mud-holes. His eyes, set so high above his snouted lower face, never even turned toward the shadow, Milo noted. It was as if the amphibian alien was concentrating all his strength of will and mind upon another matter. The land began to rise. Now the grass thinned. The ground was broken here and there by shrubs and standing stones that were like pillars and seemed unnatural, as if they had been set so for some reason, save that their setting followed no pattern. Milo, studying how they dotted the way before them, was mindful of something else. He did not need to see the shadows suddenly surge forward to understand what might menace their party here. "Where are the stones?" "Yes," Divine made answer. "They are shadow bait. See?" The shadows slipped ahead and dropped out of sight. Though the pools they formed now must lie hidden about those pillars. Nail, who had taken the lead, plainly refusing to ride close to Gould, did not even nod in reply. Rather, he wove a zigzag way for them, keeping as far from each of the stones and the things that might lurk about them as he could. It was not easy to choose a way keeping them on their general course, and yet avoiding close proximity to the standing stones. So, as twilight began once more to close in, thus rendering more dangerous their route before them, they need must slow from a steady trot to a walk. The animals of their company resisted and slowly fought that curbing. Trees show ahead, not the twisted stunted ones that had formed the thickets along the rivers, but tall standing ones. They too might give shelter to the enemy. Milo had not seen any movement of shadows since that they had disappeared among the stones. He glanced now and then at his wrist. The bracelet showed no life. Was it true that it could warn? Why, Mark broke the silence. "We are losing our guard." "How do you—" the swordsman began sharply, his tense weariness reading his voice. Was your nose, man, returned Wymark, or has it held the smell of evil so long that it reports falsely? Milo drew a deep breath. At first he could not be sure, then he was certain. The wind still blew in the same direction, from the north, but the taint it had carried earlier was indeed less strong. Instead there came a trace of the clean mountain air, the scent of pine. The cleric faced his mount around. "Be ready," he warned. They had nearly reached the end of the place of standing stones. The pack ponies, breathing laboriously, trotted on. Gult, for the first time in many hours, cried aloud in croaking words they did not know. Milo edged his own mount around, the horse fighting its control. From behind some of the stones stepped figures as solidly black as the shadows, but now standing tall. They were man-shaped if you counted the limbs that raised their bodies from the ground. The two arm appendages that each held high and wide, as if they were about to rush to embrace the travelers. On Milo's wrist the bracelet came to life. Feverishly he fought to control the spin, but the shadow men were so alien to all. He had known that what he saw interfered with his concentration. He knew without any words from his companions that this was the attack toward which the dark unknown had been building. The shadow men glided toward them, even as their former substance had flowed across the earth. Milo did not reach for his sword. He knew within himself that against such as this the sharpest steel, even an enchanted blade, could not deliver any telling blow. There came a thrilling of sound. At first Milo thought it issued from the enemy, yet there was something in the sound that strengthened his courage instead of increasing his doubts. Wymark had unbugged his harp. Now, as he swept his fingers back and forth across the strings, their mounts stood rock still. Music against those. The freshness of the air was once more overlaid with the stench of evil. Shadow men drew close, and before them spread not only the rotten scent, but also a cold deep enough to strike a man as might the full breath of a blizzard. Wymark's shards rose higher and higher on the scale. It seemed to Milo that the shadows slowed. This music, art, his ears, rang in his head. He wanted to shoot it out with his hands, but that terrible cold held him in thrall. He could no longer really hear, yet Wymark still swept the strings of the harp. Evilly cried out, swayed in her saddle. There was no sound, only pain within Milo's head, cutting out all else. The swordsman's eyes blurred. Was this attack the work of the shadows, or what Wymark wrote with his harp? For the bard continued to go through the motions of playing, even though there was nothing now to be heard. Shudders ran through Milo's body in a rhythm matching the sweep of fingers across the strings. The shadows had halted, stood facing the riders only a little more than a sword length from Wymark. The bard's hand moved faster and faster, or did it only seem so? Milo was sure of nothing save the pain beating in his head, passing downward through his body. Then the shadows shivered visibly. He was sure he saw that they wavered back as their bodies shimmered, began to lose the man form, dripped downward bit by bit as might melting candles near the heat of an open fire. They stumbled on stumps of feet, trailing lines of oozing matter behind them as they strove to reach again the shelter of the stones. Wymark played on. Now they were no man-like bodies, only once more dark pools that heaved in a losing battle against what the bard had launched. Those pools flowed joined. A single manifestation alpha rose. It formed no was a human body, rather suggested some monstrous shape. A toad head lifted for a moment, but could not hold, dissolving back into the mass. Yet the shrouded thing continued to struggle, bringing forth a tentacle here, a taloned foot there. Then the having ceased, the pool of dark lay quiescent. Waymark lifted his hand from the harp string. The pulsation of pain hissed in his listeners. Milo heard Niall's voice. "Well done, Sogsmith, and how long will that spell hold? Or is the thing dead?" "Do not grant me too much power, comrade. Like any spell, this has its limitations." "We had better ride." He was slipping the harp into its bag. Once more their horses steered. Without having to rein their mounts, they turned toward the ridge beyond and began to move up it. There was a track to follow here, faint as if it had been some seasons since it had been in use. One of Ingrid's markers pointed them into it. Up and up they went, the clean air washing from them the last of malaise brought on by the confrontation with the shadows. As they had reached the top of the ridge, Ingrid appeared. He had rounded up the pack ponies who had gone before. Now he said to Waymark, "You have been busy, bird. The Song of Ercon is not for playing by just any hand." "To each his own magic, Ranger. This is my kind." There was a halting in Waymark's reply, as if what he had done had drawn out of him much of his energy. "I have found an old place," Ingrid said. "In it our magic is still firm. Nothing of chaos, or even of love. Deer hunter there are less made free to eat by one of elfin blood. You can all lie snug tonight without watch or warder." He led the party along the ridge to a second and steeper climb beyond. Here the trees stood taller, closed in. How long they rode, Milo could not tell. He only knew that weariness rode pillion behind him, gripping him tightly. Once more stones arose, not grim and grey, like age-darkened bones, as the others lingered in his memory. These were set edge to edge, forming a wall that opened from the path. They were cloaked in the green velvet of moss, a moss that was patterned here and there by outcrops of small red cups, or brilliant orange-headed, pin-sized growths. As they passed between those rocks, which stretched out on either hand to form a continuous wall, there came a lift of spirit for the riders. The sound of the horses' shoes was muffled by another carpet of moss, and straight beyond them was what Milo took first to be a mound overgrown with small bushes. Then he saw that it was a single tree whose leafed branches, the leaves as green and full as if the season were spring and not the beginning of autumn, grew downward to touch the ground. Ingrid swept aside a mass of trailing vine, which formed the door cover, and ushered them in, leaving them to explore while he went to loose the ponies from the loads, their horses from the saddles. In the center stood a mighty trunk, of such girth as two men might well conceal themselves behind, hanging from the underside of the dropping branches that formed the inner shell of this forest house, were globes shaped like fruit, but which glowed to give light. Moss again was the carpet, a very soft and thick one. Around the lean wall were wide ledges, also moss-grown, each long enough to provide a bed. Most, and best of all, was the feeling of peace that seeped into one's weary body. Milo thought he had spent nights in many places, but never had he been greeted by such a lifting of the heart and soothing of the spirit as wrapped about him in this elven stronghold. Weariness flowed away, yet he was content to seek one of those ledges, settle himself upon it, put off his helm, and let the forest life sink into him, renewing his strength and spirit. They had eaten and were lounging, drowsy and content, when Ingrid spoke to Waymark. "You have shown us one magic, bird, but I do not think that is the limit of what you carry. Can you play the Song of Far Wings? Weimar's hand went out to touch the harp bag, which he kept ever within reach. I can, but to what purpose, Ranger? When we climb to the West Pass, Ingrid returned, we must have a guide beyond if we seek Lycius. He has the will and power to hide himself from both man and elf. We cannot find him without some aid. It has been many years since any have hunted him, but he will fail our talks and strengthen his guard spell unless we come to him by some way he has left unmarked, a way the fettered ones know. Then, once discovering the way, the elf turned Nathaniel, it would be well for you, Berserker, to lose that small one. He pointed to Afrita. Of the same blood she is, and she can carry our plea to Lycius. He is old, and long ago he swore he would have no more of any of us. But he might be interested enough to allow us to him if we have an advocate of his species. Well enough, Neil agreed. Afrita, as if she understood all the elf had said and approved of her own role to come, bobbed her head twice, then turned to hiss gently into Neil's ear, his boar helm being laid aside, leaving in view for the first time thick braids of hair coiled and pinned to add protection for his skull. End of chapter 9. Okay, another chapter and we end here for today. Chapter 10, a long one. The domain of Lycius. They stood in a sharp cut of a pass. Here the air was thin, very cold. Snow had drifted down to cloak the aches that walled them in. The edge of frost in the air that flowered about them was so cutting that they had tied over their faces any manner of scarf or strip torn from extra clothing to keep out what they could of the cold. Horses dropped, feet spraddled, their limbs shivering from the effort of the last part of the climb. The mountain had been nearly like a ladder, so they had came up it at a crawling pace, dismounted riders leading the animals. Frost gathered upon their improvised wind masks, stretched their cloaks. For the last of the upward effort, Milo had wondered if Gult would survive. The lizardman had grown more and more sluggish in his movements, though he had never voiced any complaint. In fact, his silence made Milo sometimes speculate as to what thoughts passed through that alien mind. Now Gult squatted against a small fall of rock, his eyes encrusted cloak about him. His head huddled down under the hood until only the tip of his nose protruded. Ingrid turned to Weimark, laying his mittened hand upon the arm of the bard, gesturing with the other to the harp in its bag. It was plain what he wanted of Weimark. But in this wind and cold, surely the bard dare not expose his fingers to summon up his own brand of magic. Yet it would seem that Weimark was agreeing. He cocked the end of his furred mitten between his teeth to yank it off his hand. The buried fingers he inserted under the edge of the binding about his chin and mouth, perhaps to warm them with the scanty breath these aches left in a man's lungs. With the other hand, he worried off the bag protecting his skull's harp. Then he settled down on the same fall of rock behind which Gult crowded. Milo moved forward as quickly as he could, taking up a position to shield the harper with his body as much as he might. Seeing what he would do, Devdine, Iveli, and Neil speedily came to aid in making dead with Brack. Only the elf stood alone, staring out into the swirl of clouds that screened what lay on the western side of the pass. For several long moments, Weimark's face mask he heaved and twisted. Then he brought out his hand to the strings of the harp. Milo saw him flinch and guessed that in this cold they faced the pain as immediate and severe as if the strings were molten metal. Touching the harp steadied Wymark. He began to weave a spell of sound. Wind screamed and moaned, but through that clamor arose his fierce notes, as clear and well-defined as any temple gong. They echoed and re-echoed from the rocky walls, until it seemed that more than one harper plied his heart. No pain from this playing attacked his listeners. The notes Wymark repeated over and over again rang through and then out, called the wind, like a summons. 4 times the bard swept the harp strings to play the same questing call. Then, once more, he thrust his stiffening fingers beneath the mouth scarf to blow upon them. Ingriger's shout could well bring down an avalanche should there be any dangerous overhangers now and rock. Milo tugged apprehensively. The elf had cupped his hands to form a trumpet, and once more voiced that upsurging shout. Through the greyish roofing of the upper clouds descended a great winged thing. Murky as the past was, it did not hide those widespread wings. Memory once more moved in Milo's mind, opening grudgingly another door. It was a gar eagle, the greatest of all winged creatures, save of course a dragon, that his world knew. The very beating of those wings churned up snow as the bird descended, and when it came to perch at last on a rock a little farther ahead, closed its 15-foot wings and twisted its head downward toward the elf. Over whom it would have towered another head's length had they been meeting on level ground, even Nail pushed back a fraction. The curved beak was brilliant scarlet, the hue of new spilled blood, and the fierce eyes which raked them all contemptuously. In a single survey were the gold of flames, but for the rest there was nothing but the white of the purest snow. Ingrid held up his mittened hands, palm outward and at the level of his own heart, in a ceremonial gesture of greeting. The head of the huge beard dipped again, dropping lower so that they were indeed now eye to eye. Milo did not hear any sound, save that of the wind, which once more howled since the magic of the music no longer battled with it. Their communication must be in the silent speech, mind to mind, as the elfin folk were able to do not only among themselves, but with all the sons and daughters of nature, who wore feathers, scales, or fur, or even leaves, for it was rumored that to the elf's trees were also comrades, teachers, and keen friends. The gar-eagle's hooked beak, formed to rend and tear, opened, and the bird screeched ear-piercingly. Ingrid moved back to allocate room as it spread once more those near unbelievable wings, rising up into the clouds. When their visitor had entirely disappeared, Ingrid returned. "We can move on." A wave of his hand gestured ahead. "The Great One will track us when he has word, and we dare not linger here lest the cold finish us." Luckily, the slope downward from the pass was less difficult than the climb. However, they did not try to ride, but stumbled along, stamping on feet numbed by cold. Milo chose to play rearguard, merely because he feared that Gult might drop behind and not be notified. While he had no particular friendship for lizardmen in general, this one was part of their company and deserved an equal sense. He had guessed right that the Saurian was near the end of his strength, for Milo was not yet out of the pass cleft when Gult fell forward into the snow, making no effort to rise. "Wymark!" Milo raised his voice. The bard, half hidden in cloud mist, faced around, returning as quickly as he could. Together they bundled Gult across his horse and went on, Milo leading the mount, the bard hovering beside to steady the limp body of the lizardman if he showed any sign of slaying off. Mist hid the rest of the party ahead, but once they were out of the pass itself, the wind ceased to buffet them, and Milo welcomed that small encouragement. Luckily, there was only one possible path to take. It curved to the right, where trampled snow, fast being covered, was their guide. The swordsman longed to speed up, but it was breathing in short gasps, and they could guess their footing was treacherous. Tugit was a less exacting a road. It was still steep enough to camp forth caution. Soon it became a series of ledges, each a fraction wider than the one above. They were below the cloud line now, so Milo looked ahead eagerly for their party. Hooves and boots had beaten down the snow, but he could see nothing of those who had made that trail. Confused, he halted, while the horse moved up a step, nudging at him. "What's the matter?" Wymark asked. "They are gone!" Milo's first wild thought was of some snare or spell that had needed their rest in spite of Ingrid's talent at chanting such. "Gone?" The bard loosed his hold on Gult and crawled forward to look over the swordsman's shoulder. Milo examined the ledges with greater care. The three immediately below and beyond where they had paused were trail-marked, but only half of the fourth one showed disturbed snow, as if the rest of their company had been snatched up at that point, and before he could share such a suspicion with Wymark, Ingrid appeared straight out of the mountain wall. The bard's love made Milo flash at his own stupidity. Perhaps the cold had slowed his wits and let his imagination take over. "Cave!" Wymark gave the answer Milo should have known. "Let us get there with all speed. If our friend here still has a spark of life in his body, we had better be tending it." Ingrid joined them before they were along a third of the next ledge. The elf's aid made the rest of their descent the easier. Both horses and men trusted him and did not have to pick such a careful path. They pushed through a slit in the stone to enter a cave. Despite the narrow entrance, it widened beyond into a space large enough for both men and animals. Nor was that all. A fire blazed on a flat stone, marked with the scorching of earlier flames, and about it sat the others, holding out their hands to the blaze, crowding in upon the small glow of it. With Ingrid's help, Milo and Wymark carried Gult to the source of heat. Divdine arose hurriedly. As they peeled away the ice-stiffened cloak, he leaned solicitously over the scaled body. Milo himself could distinguish no sign of life, but the healing spells of priests were well known to be able to save one very close to death. I drink a sip of water. 1 second. Beads in hand, Divdine drew his outer palm in long swooting strokes from the lizardman's domed head to his scaled and taloned feet, then down each arm in turn. The cleric's voice muttered a chant. Now the elf knelt on the other side of Gult, joining his long-fingered hands to Divdine's in the stroking. On the opposite of the fire, finding it from time to time from a pile of sticks heaped between two outflung spurs of rock, squatted Nail, and almost nosing into the meager flames was Afrita, low upon her belly, her wings outspread as if she would take into her body all the warmth she could. Wymark rubbed the hand he had bared to the wind in the pass, alternately blowing upon the fingers and holding them to the fire. Yveli had pulled open one of their supply bags to bring out a roll of the most strength-providing food they carried, dried fruit beaten into a thick pulp and then crumbled to be combined with coarsely ground dried meat. For a time, the mere fact that they were out of the breath of the mountain wind, under cover and in shelter, was enough for Milo. He watched the labor of the elf and the cleric apathetically, wondering if their efforts were not already in vain. Neither Ingrid nor Divine were willing to concede such a defeat. In the end, their efforts were rewarded. There was a hiss of pain from the lizardman. His home-lidded eyes opened slowly, and now Milo could see the rise and fall of his arched chest. Divine stopped his stroking, searched again within his robe, and brought out a small curved horn, stopped with a metal cap. With infinite care he loosed the stopper, while Ingrid raised the heavy saurian head upon his own knee, working his fingers between the fearsome fangs of Gull's jaws to open the half-conscious alien's mouth. Onto the purplish tongue thus exposed, Divine dropped 4 small measures of the liquid the horn contained, then made haste to shut the container before returning back to his patient. Gull blinked slowly, his head settled a little to one side and Ingrid's hold. Then his eyes closed. The cleric sat back on his heels. "Cloaks!" he demanded, without looking at the rest of them. "I'll cover you can spare." Only when his patience was wrapped in a layer of cloaks, with even the horse blankets heaped over him, did Divine relax. He spoke to the elf. "If he stay in the mountain, we cannot answer for his life. His people are of the steaming swamps, not conditioned to such trails as these." "Then let him return when he came," broke in Neil. "I know of all these snake skins. They are as full of treachery as a drinking horn of ale in an indifferent inn. We should have been the better, priest, had his spirit departed from him." "You forget," the battle maid answered him. "It's not the same fetter on him as the ones we must wear." She thrust her arm farther into the firelight, where the flames awoke the glinting life, the reddish gleam of the bracelet. "I do not know by what method we were chosen, but it is plain that he was meant to be one of our company." Neil snorted. "Yes, to betray us, perhaps. I tell you, that one I shall watch, and should they in any way arise doubts of his actions, he will answer to me." His lips flattened against his tusk fangs. Milo stared. There was no time for the berserker to allow his change-making rage to take control of his human part. He inched forward and dared to lay hand on the massive arm within his reach. "There is more wisdom in what she says than in your doubts, warrior." Neil's head swung in his direction. The berserker's small eyes already held a warning light. "I say, say," Marco repeated, but he made of that single word a sing-song of notice. His uncovered arm rested on his knee, and now he fingered one string and then another, not as if he chose to use his song magic, but rather as if he tried each in turn to make sure of his strength. Even as a warrior before battle looks to the state of his weaponry. Yet, even such a seemingly idle plucking carried with it sounds that echoed softly through the cave. Milo, who had been about to tighten his grip on Neil's arm in perhaps a futile attempt to bring the berserker to his senses, found his hold broken. His hand fell away to rest on his own knee. Just as the warmth of the fire sank into his chilled body, so did those random notes warm his mind, bringing a release from tension, a gentle dreaminess from which all that might harm or threaten was barred. The swordsman chewed away at the bit of rolled journey food Yveli had handed him. Content with the warmth and that ease of mind, though an instinct buried deep inside him still was aware enough to cry out that this easement was of magic and would not long hold. Outside the cave, darkness gathered. Old Ingrid arose now and then to feed the fire, but no longer with wood. Later he brought lumps of coal from some inner bay to be set with skill among the brands, so that in turn those kindled, giving new life and strength to the flames. Now and then one of the horses or ponies tethered farther in, stamped or snorted, but those by the fire were sunk in the silent bomb of their own thoughts or dreams. Once Milo rose enough to mention the need for a sentry, but Neil, his voice a whispering rumble, pointed to Afrita, saying, "She will give voice in warning. Her senses are better than ours for such service." The pseudo-dragon had waddled so close to the fire that Milo wondered if it would not sing her. Her long neck uncoiled, her head darted forth, and her jaws clamped upon a bit of glowing coal. She crunched it, as if it were some dainty to be relished, and pounced upon a second. What Milo knew of her kind, even of the greater true dragons, was very little. He had always supposed that their legendary fire rating was just that, a legend with no truthful foundation. But it would seem that it was true. Nail made no attempt to prevent her epicure feast, even though there was a faint puffing of smoke trails from her throat. "Eat well, my beauty," the berserker half whispered. "You will need such fire within you if we stay long in this land." To stare into the fire brought drowsiness. Nail might believe that his winged companion was adequate protection for their camp. But the tested soldier within Milo could not quite accept that. Finally, he got up and went to the mouth of the cave. In doing so, he seemed to pass through an actual wall. The heat that hung so comfortingly around the fire was lost instantly. He shivered and drew closer his cloak, as he peered out into a night so dark and starless that he had to depend upon his ears rather than his eyes to guess what was beyond. The sound of the wind among the peaks made a threatening cry, like that of a hunting beast prowling in the mountains. It shrieked and puffed fine snow into his face, which stung his flesh like needles of ice. By all the sounds he could identify, a storm had closed in upon the high country. Perhaps only the cave shelter had saved their lives. Even magic could not withstand such raging of nature. Milo stepped back. The others, even intrigued, slept, but the swordsman found himself shaken out of the charmed contentment while Mark's harping had produced. Till he sat down once more by the fire, he could not drowse. Rather, he tried to order his thoughts, looking from one to another of his strangely assorted company. Each represented certain abilities and strengths, also probably weakness, which differed. Even though he, Nail, and Yveli were fighters, they were far from being alike. The cleric, the bard, and the elf commanded other talents and gifts. The lizardman-like Nail, Milo wondered why the alien had been added to their motley company. It was true that the Saurian ancestral ones were swamp dwellers, needing both water and turgid heat about them to function best. Yet guilt, uncomplaining, had ridden into the near waterless plains and climbed as long as he could into what must be for him a hell of cold. The lizard folk in their own lands and with their own weapons were warriors of high standing. Therefore, there must be some reason why Gert should arrive with them now, not just because he also wore the bracelet which was the badge of their slavery to some unknown menace. As he gazed into the fire, Milo was once more plagued by fleeting memories of that other world. He stared uneasily, though he must seal them away for his own sake. To be divided in mind when danger stalked, and when did it not hear, was to be weakened. He slept at last. This time he dreamed vividly. A dark stone wall loomed large, About the base of the wall grew greenery, a greenery that was not natural, that was too bright, that shuddered and shook, as if the plants themselves strove to drag their roots from out the soil and charge at him. Grey wall, green that had a life he could not understand, and there was a piercing shriek. Milo roused. For a moment he was so completely bewildered at the breaking of his dream that he only stared bewilderedly at the fire. Grey walls, fire. No, the walls had not been composed of flames, but rather of solid stone. Again that shriek. Now Ingrid moved lightly toward the outer entrance. The others sat up. Nail's hand gripped his axe, and Afrita perched on his shoulder. Though her mouth was open and her tongue darted in and out, she did not hiss. Milo's hand about Swordale moved out behind the elf. There was no dark ahead now, rather the grey of an overcast day, but their view of the dull sky was nearly hidden by the vast form of the gar-eagle, who had settled on the ledge without, its head lowered so that it might look into the cave. Once more the bird loosed its mighty scream. Ingrid fronted it eye to eye in the same form of silent communication they had earlier held. Milo fidgeted at his side, not for the first time, wishing that some of the talents of the elven kind were also shared by man. That confrontation of elf and bird continued for what seemed a long space. Then Ingrid stepped within the overhang of the cave as huge wings fanned the air. Up into the thin atmosphere of the heights sped the gar-eagle, while the elf returned to the company now roused and waiting by the fire. Leches lies to the south, in a place he has made his own, Ingrid reported shortly. It remains to be seen if he will accept our company. Accept. Your little one, now he spoke to Nail, it is she who must speak for us in the end. The berserker nodded. Afrita knows. But how far is this dragon dwelling? We have not the wings of your messenger, nor can Afrita take the way such a mighty one follow. A single blast from the wind in these reaches will be her far off course. She need not try her wings, not until we reach the boundaries Leches has established to protect himself, returned the elf. As to how far away, he shrugged, that I cannot measure in our distance upon land, for wreck, he waved to the outer world, plainly naming the gar-eagle, does not reckon distance, as do we who are wingless. He has set the way in a pattern for my mind only, as he looked down upon it from afar. However, we can descend the lower lands and move from one valley to another, sheltering in part from the cold. Even Guld, aroused enough to sit one of the mounts, still wrapped as well as they could manage against the chill of the aches, making no complaints as Divdine led his horse once more out into the blast that had nearly killed the lizard man. Thus they followed the path of the ledges down until scrub trees, finally forest giants, closed about them in a dark green silence, through which Ingrid took a twisting route with the same confidence one treads a well-marked road. End of chapter 8. Okay, and for today is enough. Next time, Tuesday, I think Thursday is tomorrow, Thursday, we read chapter 11 and chapter 12. We are in the second half of the novel. So, for today is all. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, have a nice dinner. Goodbye, bye, ciao.